Welcome to Revenge with Arya. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed like dying insects. I was lying on the bathroom floor of my own apartment, my cheek pressed against the cold porcelain base of the toilet, and I couldn't remember how I got there. My hands were shaking so hard that my fingernails were clicking against the tile. Somewhere behind me, I heard my older sister's voice, casual, almost amused. She probably just drank too much again. Then my mother, louder, closer, standing in the doorway without stepping in. Get up. You're embarrassing yourself. Your sister drove 40 minutes to have dinner with you, and this is what you do. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt 3 sizes too big. My stomach had already emptied itself twice, and now it was just dry heaving, violent contractions that made my ribs feel like they were snapping one by one. The room was spinning, not the slow, lazy spin of being drunk, but a lurching, violent tilt like the entire building was being picked up and dropped. I hadn't had a single drink. I'd had 1 glass of iced tea. The same sweet tea my mother had poured for me from the pitcher she brought from home, the way she always did on Sunday dinners. The same tea she insisted I drink first because she'd made it special, just the way you like it. Through the blur of tears and nausea, I caught a glimpse of my sister leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I'd seen 100 times but never understood until that exact moment. She wasn't worried. She was waiting. And my mother, who hadn't taken a single step into the bathroom, who stood at the threshold like an audience member watching a performance, wasn't checking on me. She was checking if it was working. But neither of them knew that 20 minutes earlier, before the first wave of nausea hit, I had pressed the emergency button on my phone. It was a feature my coworker Jamie had insisted I install 3 weeks ago, after the last episode, the one that landed me in urgent care with unexplained vomiting and a heart rate of 145. Something's not right, Jamie had said, looking at me over her coffee mug at the office. You've been sick after every single family dinner for 4 months. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. I had dismissed her then. Families don't poison each other. That's something from crime shows, not real life in Columbus, Ohio. But Jamie had served 2 tours as an army medic, and she trusted patterns more than she trusted people. She'd quietly set up the SOS feature on my phone, 3 taps on the power button, and it would call 911 with my GPS location. No voice required. So when my vision started tunneling in the bathroom and my mother's voice turned into static, my thumb found that button, 3 taps. I didn't even know if it worked. I just prayed. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. I know this because the dispatch log would later become evidence. 11 minutes that felt like 11 hours. My mother answered the door with the performance of a lifetime. I don't know what happened, she told the first responder, her voice trembling with rehearsed concern. We were just having dinner, and she suddenly got sick. She does this sometimes. She has a sensitive stomach. The paramedic, a woman with short red hair and steady hands, didn't respond to my mother. She walked past her like she wasn't there, straight to the bathroom where I was curled on the floor. She knelt beside me, 2 fingers on my wrist, her eyes scanning my face, my lips, my fingertips. Can you tell me your name? She asked. I mouthed it. No sound came out. She leaned closer, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Your heart rate is dangerously high, and your pupils are constricted. I need you to nod if you consumed anything unusual tonight. I tried to nod. I think I managed it. She didn't waste a second. She stood up, turned to her partner, and said clearly, loud enough for the whole apartment to hear. We're transporting, and I need you to bag everything in that kitchen. Every glass, every plate, every container. Don't let anyone touch that table. My sister stepped forward, her composure cracking for the first time. Excuse me? You can't just, this is her apartment. She invited us for dinner. The paramedic didn't even look at her. Ma'am, I can and I will. Stand back. That was the moment I saw something shift in my mother's face. Not guilt, she was too practiced for guilt. But calculation. The quick, darting movement of someone recalculating their next move. They loaded me onto the stretcher and wheeled me out. As we passed through the living room, I noticed something small but devastating. The pitcher of sweet tea, the one my mother had carried in with both hands like a gift, was gone from the kitchen counter. I tried to say something, to point. But the oxygen mask was already on my face, and the paramedic was watching my vitals on a portable monitor. "Stay with me," she said. "We're going to figure this out." In the ambulance, she made a call that changed everything. Not to the hospital, to the police. "This is Medic 7, responding to a 911 SOS activation at 1847 Elm Creek Drive, apartment 4B. Patient is a 28-year-old female presenting with acute poisoning symptoms. I'm requesting law enforcement to secure the scene. Be advised, 2 family members are present and may have removed evidence from the kitchen." She said it clinically, without emotion, like reading a grocery list. But the weight of those words pressed down on my chest harder than any poison. Removed evidence. Family members. At the hospital, things moved fast. Blood draw, urine sample, IV fluids. A toxicology panel that the attending physician ordered stat, which meant they expected to find something ugly. The ER doctor was a tall man with glasses and a calm voice that didn't match the urgency in his hands. "We're treating for potential organophosphate exposure," he told the nurse. Then, turning to me, "Have you been around any pesticides, cleaning chemicals, anything like that recently?" I shook my head. He paused, studied my chart. "This is your 3rd visit in 4 months with similar symptoms." It wasn't a question. He already knew. Jamie had been right. I should have listened sooner. I should have listened 4 months ago, when the first episode happened after Thanksgiving dinner. My mother had made her sweet potato pie, the one she only makes for special occasions. I'd had 2 slices. By midnight, I was in the ER with vomiting, blurred vision, and tremors. The doctors ran tests, found nothing conclusive, and sent me home with instructions to hydrate. Then Christmas dinner. Same symptoms. Same ER visit. Same inconclusive results. Then a "just because I miss you" dinner in January. Same thing. Every single time, my mother had brought something homemade. Every single time, I was the only one who got sick. And every single time, when I'd call my mother the next day to tell her I'd been in the hospital, she'd say the same thing. "You've always had a weak stomach. You need to take better care of yourself." The toxicology results came back at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because the clock on the wall was the only thing I could focus on when the doctor walked in with the printout and a detective I hadn't seen before. "We found elevated levels of thallium in your blood," the doctor said. Thallium is a heavy metal. It's odorless, tasteless, and highly toxic. In the concentration we're seeing, this wasn't accidental exposure. The detective stepped forward. He was maybe 50. With a face that had clearly seen worse things than a hospital room at 3 a.m. But his eyes were kind. "I know this is a lot to process," he said, "but I need to tell you what we found at your apartment." He opened a folder. Inside were photographs, the kitchen counter, the dining table, and a small glass vial recovered from your mother's purse. My mother's purse. The room went silent except for the steady beep of my heart monitor, which was getting faster. "Your sister had already poured the contents of the tea pitcher down the sink by the time officers arrived," the detective continued. "But the drain trap still contained residue. It matched the substance in the vial." I stared at the photograph of the vial. It was small, maybe 2 inches tall, the kind you'd buy from a chemical supply store. My mother had been carrying it in her purse. To my apartment. To Sunday dinner. Why? The word came out ragged, broken. The detective exchanged a look with the doctor before answering. "We're still building the full picture, but we've already obtained your father's estate documents." My father, he died 2 years ago. Heart failure, the doctor said. He was 59. He left behind a $750,000 life insurance policy. I was the sole beneficiary. He changed it 6 months before he died, removing my mother and sister and naming only me. My mother had contested the will. She lost. The probate court upheld my father's wishes, and the money was transferred to a trust in my name. My mother never spoke about it directly, but something shifted after that. She became warmer, more attentive, more insistent on family dinners. She started calling every week, bringing homemade food, telling me she was sorry for the years of distance between us. I thought she was healing. I thought we were finally becoming a real family. Instead, she was calculating how long it would take for a slow accumulation of thallium to shut down my organs, and she was making sure she and my sister were the first people investigators would call when it happened. If I died without a will of my own, the money would flow back to them as next of kin. They weren't poisoning me out of rage. They were poisoning me on a schedule. The detective told me they requested my father's medical records that night. His symptoms before death, hair loss, numbness in his extremities, cardiac irregularities were consistent with chronic thallium exposure. My father didn't die of heart failure. I couldn't cry. I wanted to, but my body had nothing left. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in each square, because counting was easier than comprehending that my mother had likely killed my father and was now trying to kill me for money she felt entitled to. By the next morning, both my mother and sister had been arrested. Not questioned, not asked to come in voluntarily. Arrested. At their homes, at 5:30 a.m., in handcuffs, in front of their neighbors. The charges were attempted murder in the first degree for me, and the district attorney announced publicly that they were reopening my father's case as a potential homicide. My sister broke first. Within 48 hours of her arrest, she was talking to prosecutors, trying to cut a deal. She told them everything: how my mother had researched thallium online using a VPN she thought was untraceable, how she'd ordered it from an overseas supplier under a fake name, how they'd practiced the dosing on stray cats in my mother's garage before ever putting it in my food. The cats. I remembered my mother mentioning that strays in her neighborhood had been disappearing. She'd said it like it was a curiosity, a small-town mystery. She was running trials. My sister also confirmed what I'd already suspected. They had started with my father. Low doses over 8 months. Just enough to mimic natural decline. By the time he was hospitalized, the damage was irreversible, and no one thought to test for thallium because who tests for that when a 59-year-old man has a heart attack? The prosecutor told me my sister's cooperation would likely reduce her sentence, but that my mother was facing the full weight of the charges. First-degree murder for my father. Attempted first-degree murder for me. Criminal conspiracy. Evidence tampering. I didn't want updates. I didn't want to know the legal details. I just wanted to breathe without wondering if the air was safe. Jamie picked me up from the hospital on the 3rd day. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a key to her guest room and said, "Stay as long as you need. The fridge is full and the door has 3 locks." For the first 2 weeks, I barely left that room. Not because I was afraid, but because I was decompressing from 28 years of a life I now had to re-examine through a completely different lens. Every family dinner, every holiday, every moment my mother had smiled at me and said, "Eat up, I made this just for you." How long had she been planning it? Did she look at me across the Thanksgiving table and think about timelines? Did she calculate dosages while asking me about my day at work? The nightmares were the worst part. Not about dying, about the dinners. About sitting at the table, laughing, passing dishes, feeling loved, and knowing now that every bite was a betrayal wrapped in a mother's smile. Jamie never pushed me to talk about it. But one evening, she sat down across from me at her kitchen table and slid a folder across the surface. "Your father's army buddy contacted me through the VA network," she said. "He wants you to have this." Inside was a letter my father had written 6 months before he died. It was addressed to me, sealed, and had been left with his friend with instructions to deliver it only if something happens to me and it doesn't feel right. The letter was 3 pages long. I won't share every word, some things are too sacred for that, but the key passage hit me like a freight train. He wrote that he'd changed his will because he didn't trust my mother with money. That she'd been pressuring him for years to increase his life insurance. That she'd started acting strange, overly attentive, cooking all his meals, insisting he not eat out. He wrote, "I don't have proof of anything, baby girl. Maybe I'm just paranoid. But if you're reading this, then my gut was right, and I wasn't paranoid enough." I held that letter for an hour without moving. My father had known. He'd felt it. He'd tried to protect me the only way he could by moving the money out of her reach. And she killed him for it anyway. The trial took 9 months to reach conclusion. My mother's defense attorney argued that my sister was the mastermind and my mother was a passive participant manipulated by her older daughter. My sister's attorney argued the exact opposite. They turned on each other in open court, pointing fingers, shouting accusations. Each one trying to sacrifice the other to save herself. The jury didn't buy either story. The evidence was overwhelming. The thallium orders traced to my mother's IP address despite the VPN. The text messages between my mother and sister discussing the timeline. My sister's internet search history showing she'd researched thallium detection in autopsy and how long does thallium stay in the body after death. And the testimony of the veterinarian who had been quietly tracking the disappearance of stray cats in my mother's neighborhood and had found 2 deceased animals with thallium in their systems. My mother was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. My sister was convicted of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy. She received 35 years. No parole eligibility for 20. When the verdicts were read, neither of them looked at me. My mother stared straight ahead, her jaw set, her hands folded in her lap like she was sitting in church. My sister sobbed, loudly, theatrically, the way she always did when she wanted sympathy. But the courtroom was quiet. No one offered her comfort. I walked out of that courthouse into a Tuesday afternoon in October. The leaves were turning. The air was crisp. Jamie was waiting by her car, 2 coffees in the cup holder. "How do you feel?" she asked. I took a long breath, the deepest breath I'd taken in years. It didn't burn. It didn't taste like metal. It didn't come with the fear that it might be my last. "I feel alive," I said. Actually alive. We drove to the cemetery. I hadn't visited my father's grave since the funeral because my mother had always insisted on going together, and somehow, every visit with her felt performative. But that afternoon, I sat on the grass beside his headstone, alone, and I told him everything. I told him the money was safe. I told him the letter saved me. I told him he was right to be afraid and that I was sorry no one believed him in time. And I told him that the women who took him from this world would spend the rest of their lives behind walls he'd never have to see. I stayed until the sun went low and the shadows stretched long across the grass. When I stood up, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a block number. I almost deleted it without listening. But something made me press play. My sister's voice, recorded from a prison phone, came through the speaker thin and echoing. "You think you won? You ruined this family. Mom is never getting out because of you. I hope you're happy with your blood money." I listened to the whole thing. Then I deleted it. And I walked back to my car feeling something I hadn't felt in 28 years. Not happiness that would come later. Slowly, in small doses that didn't need to be tested for poison. What I felt was peace. The heavy, earned, bone-deep kind of peace that comes from knowing the truth finally has a voice, and it doesn't need to shout. Because justice, real justice, doesn't always arrive with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it starts with 3 quiet taps on a phone, a coworker who refuses to look away, and a letter from a father who loved his daughter enough to whisper the truth from beyond the grave. If someone in your life is making you sick and telling you it's your fault, listen to your body. Document everything. Tell one person you trust. Because the people who poison you will always have an explanation for your pain. But the evidence doesn't lie. And, sooner or later, the truth doesn't just surface, it convicts. You're watching Revenge with Aria. If this story moved you, leave a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'll see you in the next video.